The message arrived at 3 in the morning, Earth time. It came through the quantum relay network that connected humanity to the rest of the galaxy, and it carried the seal of the Galactic Council. President Daniel Carter was woken from his sleep by his chief of staff, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Holmes, who handed him a tablet with shaking hands. "Sir, you need to see this," she said. Daniel sat up in his bed and read the message twice. His face showed nothing, but his jaw tightened with each word. The Galactic Council, the ancient governing body that ruled over 12 alien species and countless star systems, was summoning humanity to answer for crimes of aggression. They claimed that human ships had entered territory belonging to the Vectari Dominion. They claimed that human colonies were being built in spaces that did not belong to them. They demanded that a representative come to the council station within 30 standard days, or humanity would face consequences. Daniel put down the tablet and looked at Patricia. "Wake up Laura and Kevin. Get them to the situation room in 1 hour." Patricia nodded and left quickly. Daniel sat alone in the darkness for a long moment, thinking about what this message really meant. Humanity had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. In the eyes of the galaxy, they were children. They were insects. They were nothing. And now the adults were angry. 1 hour later, Daniel walked into the situation room beneath the White House. Secretary of Defense Laura Bennett was already there. Her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. Admiral Kevin Price sat across from her, a large man with broad shoulders and a face that had seen too many battles. Both of them had read the message. "It's a trap," Laura said immediately. "They're looking for an excuse to put us in our place. We've been growing too fast, and they don't like it." Kevin nodded slowly. "The Vectari have been watching us for years. Every time we establish a new colony, their scouts are there within weeks. They've been mapping our movements, testing our defenses. This summons isn't about territory. It's about fear." Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the head of the table. "Fear of what?" "Fear of what we might become," Kevin said. "We went from our first warp flight to a fleet of 200 ships in 3 decades. No species in galactic history has advanced that fast. The council members have been around for thousands of years. They're used to being the only powers that matter. And now there's a new player at the table." Laura leaned forward. "We could refuse to go. Tell them we don't recognize their authority over human space, and give them exactly what they want," Daniel replied. "An excuse to call us hostile. An excuse to unite the other species against us." He shook his head. "No, we go. We face them directly. Then we send an ambassador," Laura said. "Someone expendable. Someone who can take the heat while we prepare our defenses back home." Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the message, about the cold and formal language, about the way it treated humanity like a misbehaving child. He thought about the 42,000 people who had lived on Kepler's Hope, and the 39,000 who had died there 14 months ago when Vectari ships came without warning. The galaxy didn't know about that yet. The council didn't know. Or maybe they did know, and they simply didn't care. "I'm going myself," Daniel said. Both Laura and Kevin started to protest, but Daniel raised his hand. "If they want to talk to humanity, they'll talk to me. Not some ambassador they can ignore. Not some diplomat they can push around. They'll look into my eyes and hear what I have to say." Laura's face was tight with worry. "Sir, this is incredibly dangerous. If something happens to you out there, we lose our commander-in-chief. We lose our leader. That makes sure nothing happens to me," Daniel said simply. "Kevin, I want the Liberty ready to go within a week. Full crew, best people we have. And I want a security detail that can handle anything." Kevin nodded. "I'll assign Captain Marcus Webb. He's the best we have." "Good. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise over Washington, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. But Daniel knew better. "There's something else," he said without turning around. "Something you both need to understand before we go any further." Lavra and Kevin exchanged glances. "Kepler's hope wasn't an accident," Daniel continued. "It wasn't pirates. It wasn't some rogue faction. We finished analyzing the wreckage, the sensor data, the flight paths. Those ships came from Victari military bases. They were operating under orders. The room went very quiet. The Victari killed our people," Daniel said, finally turning to face them. "They murdered 42,000 innocent civilians, and then they called us here to accuse us of aggression. They think we're too weak to fight back. They think we're too scared to tell the truth." His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "They're wrong." Laura's eyes had gone hard. "What's the plan?" "We go to the council. We let them make their accusations. And then we show them exactly what they did, in front of every species in the galaxy. We make them answer for Kepler's hope." Kevin was nodding slowly, a grim smile forming on his face. "And if they don't like what they hear?" Daniel picked up the tablet and looked at the council's message one more time. "Then they'll learn what happens when you attack humanity's home." The next 7 days were a blur of activity. The S Liberty was prepared for the longest journey any human president had ever taken. Supplies were loaded, systems were checked, and a crew of the finest officers in the fleet was assembled. Sophie Grant, a young woman who spoke 14 alien languages, was brought on as the official translator. Captain Marcus Webb selected his security team personally, choosing men and women who had proven themselves in the skirmishes along the frontier. On the morning of departure, Daniel stood on the observation deck of the Liberty and watched Earth grow smaller in the viewport. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds, home. Everything he was fighting for. Patricia had asked him if he was scared. He had told her no, but standing there, watching his world disappear into the blackness of space, Daniel admitted the truth to himself. He was terrified. Not of the Council, not of the Victari. He was terrified of failing the people who were counting on him. He would not let that happen. The Liberty jumped to warp speed, and the stars stretched into lines of light. The journey to the galactic core would take 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to plan. 3 weeks before humanity faced judgment. The Council Station was the largest structure Daniel had ever seen. It orbited a dying red star at the heart of the galaxy, a massive ring of metal and glass that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Lights glittered across its surface like stars themselves, and ships from a dozen different species moved around it in carefully organized patterns. This was the center of galactic civilization. This was where the powerful gathered to decide the fate of worlds, and humanity had never been invited before. The Liberty approached slowly, following the flight path that had been assigned to them. Daniel stood on the bridge with Lavra, Kevin, Sophie, and Captain Webb, all of them staring at the station through the main viewport. None of them spoke. There was nothing to say. A cold voice came through the communication system. "Human vessel Liberty, you are cleared for docking at Bay 17. Your delegation will be escorted to the council chamber. Do not deviate from your assigned route. Do not carry weapons beyond personal sidearms. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention." Sophie translated the message, though Daniel had understood most of it. The tone was clear enough in any language. "You are tolerated here. Nothing more. Friendly welcome," Kevin muttered. "They want us to feel small," Laura said. "Don't let them get in your head." Daniel straightened his jacket and checked his appearance in the reflection of a dark screen. He was wearing his best suit, dark blue with a silver pin on his lapel showing the flag of Earth. He looked calm. He looked confident. He hoped it wasn't a lie. The docking process took 20 minutes. When the Liberty finally connected to the station, the airlock opened to reveal 4 tall figures in silver armor. They were Karathi, a species known for their strength and their role as the Council's enforcers. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, and they carried long weapons that hummed with energy. "Follow," one of them said. It was not a request. The walk to the council chamber took them through corridors filled with aliens of every shape and size. Some were small and quick, with too many legs. Others were massive, with bodies like mountains moving slowly through the crowd. Many of them stopped to stare at the humans. Some pointed and whispered to each other. A few made sounds that might have been laughter. Sophie walked close to Daniel, quietly identifying the species they passed. "Those are Mentari," she said, nodding toward a group of tall insectoid creatures with large compound eyes. "They're known for their logic and their neutrality. The council often asks them to mediate disputes. And those?" Daniel asked, looking at a cluster of reptilian beings with black scales and cold eyes. Sophie's voice dropped. "Vectari." Daniel looked at them carefully. They stared back with open hatred. One of them made a gesture that Daniel didn't recognize, but he could guess its meaning. "Keep walking," Captain Webb said quietly, his hand resting on his sidearm. The council chamber was at the center of the station, a vast circular room with a domed ceiling that showed the stars above. 12 enormous seats were arranged in a semicircle, each one designed for a different species. The seats towered over the floor, forcing anyone who stood before them to look up. It was designed to intimidate, and it worked. Daniel's delegation was led to a small platform in the center of the room. They stood there alone, surrounded by empty space, while the council members looked down at them from their thrones. The Arbiter sat in the largest seat at the center. It was an ancient being, its body hidden beneath flowing robes, its face a mass of wrinkles and folds that made it impossible to read any expression. The Arbiter had led the council for over 1,000 years. It had seen species rise and fall. It had watched empires crumble to dust. "The human delegation is present," the Arbiter announced, its voice echoing through the chamber. "We will now hear the accusations." Ambassador Drethkal of the Vectari Dominion rose from his seat. He was tall and thin, with scales that gleamed like oil and eyes that held no warmth. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and filled with false politeness. "Honored members of the council," Drethkal began, "we come before you today to address a growing threat to the peace and stability of our galaxy. The human species, despite their young age and limited experience, have shown disturbing signs of aggression and expansion." He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed maps of human space, with arrows pointing outward toward neighboring territories. In the past decade alone, humans have established 47 new colonies. They have built military installations in 12 sectors that border Vectari territory. They have increased their fleet size by 300%. Drethkal paused for effect. "This is not the behavior of a peaceful species. This is the behavior of conquerors." Several council members nodded. Others remained still, watching. "We have attempted to communicate our concerns through diplomatic channels," Drethkal continued. "We have asked the humans to slow their expansion, to respect the boundaries that have existed for millennia. They have ignored us. They have continued to push outward, claiming more and more space for themselves." He turned to look directly at Daniel. "And so we ask this council to take action. We ask that humanity be ordered to withdraw from all disputed territories. We ask that their fleet be reduced to defensive levels only. And we ask that they be placed under observation to ensure they do not threaten the peace again." The chamber was silent when Drethkal finished. Daniel could feel the weight of 100 eyes upon him. Some curious, some hostile, some bored. The Arbiter turned its ancient gaze toward the human delegation. President Carter, you have heard the accusations against your species. How do you respond? Daniel looked at Laura, who gave him a small nod. He looked at Sophie, who was ready to translate if needed. He looked at Captain Webb, whose hand had not left his weapon. Then he stepped forward and looked up at the council. Honored members, Daniel said, his voice clear and steady. I thank you for the opportunity to address these accusations. Before I respond, I would like to tell you a story. Drethkal made a sound of irritation. The council does not have time for human stories. Then the council should make time, Daniel replied calmly, because this story involves the Victari Dominion, and I think everyone here needs to hear it. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Arbiter raised one thin hand for silence. Continue, President Carter. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data crystal. He held it up so everyone could see. 14 months ago, there was a human colony called Kepler's Hope. It was a small world, far from Earth on the very edge of our territory. 42,000 people lived there. Farmers, scientists, teachers, children. They were building a new life among the stars. He placed the crystal on the podium before him. And then, without warning, they were attacked. The crystal activated, and holographic images filled the chamber. Ships descending from orbit. Fire raining down on cities. People running through streets filled with smoke and flame. These are not actors, Daniel said. These are not simulations. This is what happened to our people. And these ships, these weapons, these markings on the hulls, they belong to the Victari Dominion. The chamber exploded into chaos. The holographic images continued to play as the council chamber erupted into noise. Species that had been silent now shouted at each other across the room. The Victari delegation was on their feet, hissing and snarling. Ambassador Drethkal's smooth composure had cracked, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. Lies! Drethkal shouted over the chaos. Human fabrications designed to distract from their own crimes. Daniel stood perfectly still in the center of the storm. He let the images speak for themselves. A hospital burning. A school reduced to rubble. Bodies lying in the streets. Human bodies. While Victari ships circled overhead like vultures. The Arbiter raised both hands and spoke a single word in a language that Daniel did not understand. Immediately, silence fell over the chamber. Every species present knew the way of that command. President Carter, the Arbiter said slowly, these are serious accusations. You claim that the Victari Dominion attacked a human colony without provocation. What evidence do you offer beyond these images? Daniel nodded to Sophie, who stepped forward with a tablet. We have complete sensor logs from the orbital defense platforms around Kepler's Hope, Daniel explained. These platforms recorded everything that happened, from the moment the Victari fleet dropped out of warp to the final bombardment. The data includes ship identification codes, weapon signatures, and flight patterns that trace directly back to Victari military bases. Sophie transferred the data to the Council's display system. Charts and numbers filled the air around them, technical details that experts from every species could examine. We also recovered wreckage from Victari missiles that did not explode, Daniel continued. Our scientists have analyzed them. The manufacturing marks, the fuel composition, the targeting systems, all of it is Victari military standard. Drethkal pushed forward, his voice rising. This proves nothing. Anyone could have planted this evidence. The humans are trying to start a war. Ambassador Drethkal, Daniel said, turning to face him directly. I did not come here to start a war. Your people already started one when they murdered 39,000 of my citizens. The words hung in the air like a blade. 39,000, Daniel repeated. Men, women, and children. The attack lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of continuous bombardment on civilian targets. No military installations. No defensive positions. Just homes and hospitals and schools. He walked closer to the holographic display and pointed to specific images. This is the central plaza of the main settlement. 3,000 people were gathered there for a harvest festival when the first bombs fell. This is the underground shelter where 500 children were hiding. It was hit by a bunker buster missile designed to penetrate deep into rock. There were no survivors. Several council members had gone very quiet. The Montari representative, a tall insectoid called Xylith, had leaned forward in their seat, compound eyes fixed on the images. "And here," Daniel said, pulling up one final image, "is what we found when rescue ships finally arrived. Mass graves. Our people had to dig mass graves because there were too many bodies to identify." The chamber was completely silent now. Drethkal tried again, but his voice had lost its smoothness. "The Victari Dominion categorically denies any involvement in this alleged attack. We demand that these accusations be stricken from the record." "You can deny all you want," Daniel said, "but denials don't change the truth. Your ships killed our people. Your weapons burned our colony. And then you had the audacity to summon us here, to stand in this chamber and accuse us of aggression." He pointed directly at Drethkal. "You attacked our home. You thought we were too weak to fight back. You thought we were too young, too primitive, too afraid to do anything but accept what you did to us." Daniel's voice grew harder with each word. "You were wrong." The arbiter shifted in its seat. "President Carter, if what you say is true, this is a grave matter. But accusations alone are not enough. The Council must verify this evidence. We must conduct our own investigation." "Of course," Daniel agreed. "We welcome any investigation. We have nothing to hide. But while you investigate, I want this Council to understand something very important." He turned slowly, looking at each of the 12 representatives in turn. "Humanity did not come to the stars looking for enemies. We came looking for friends, for knowledge, for a place among the galactic community. When we first made contact with alien species, we were excited. We were hopeful. We believed that the universe was filled with wonders waiting to be discovered." His voice softened, but only slightly. "And then the Victari showed us the truth. They showed us that the galaxy is not a place of wonder. It is a place of power. The strong survive. The weak are destroyed. And humanity, in the eyes of this council, was weak." Daniel paused. "But we learned, honored members. We learned quickly." He activated another section of the holographic display. This time, instead of death and destruction, the images showed something else entirely. Shipyards orbiting Earth, filled with vessels under construction. Fleet formations moving through space with military precision. Weapon systems that crackled with barely contained energy. "After Kepler's hope, we changed," Daniel said. "We stopped building colony ships. We started building warships. We stopped reaching out with open hands. We started reaching out with closed fists." Kevin Price, watching from the delegation platform, allowed himself a small smile of pride. "In 14 months, we have tripled our military capacity. We have developed new weapons, new defenses, new strategies. Our scientists have made breakthroughs that your experts said were impossible. Our engineers have built ships that can match anything in your fleets." The images continued to scroll past. More ships. More weapons. More soldiers training for war. "We did not want this," Daniel said. "We did not ask for this. But you forced our hand. You attacked innocent people, and you expected us to do nothing. You expected us to cower and beg for mercy." He looked directly at Drethkal. "Humanity does not beg." The Victari ambassador had gone pale beneath his scales. His eyes darted between Daniel and the other council members, looking for support that was not there, but Representative Xylith spoke for the first time. "These images of your military buildup are impressive, President Carter. But surely you understand that threatening the council is not wise." "I am not threatening anyone," Daniel replied. "I am making a promise. Humanity will defend itself. Humanity will protect its people. And humanity will never again allow another species to attack our homes without consequence." He deactivated the holographic display. "We came here seeking justice, not war. We want the commanders responsible for Kepler's Hope to stand trial for their crimes. We want reparations for the families who lost everything. And we want a guarantee that this will never happen again." Daniel faced the Arbiter directly. "Give us justice, and there will be peace. Deny us justice, and there will be a reckoning." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. The weight of Daniel's words pressed down on every being present. This was not the behavior of a weak species. This was not the pleading of primitive. This was a warning. The Arbiter finally spoke, its ancient voice heavy with thought. "The Council will recess to consider this evidence. We will reconvene in one standard day to deliver our response." Daniel nodded. "We will be waiting." As the delegation was escorted out of the chamber, Lavra fell into step beside him. "That was quite a performance," she whispered. "It wasn't a performance," Daniel replied quietly. "It was the truth." Behind them, the council members had already begun arguing among themselves. The balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted, and everyone knew it. Humanity was no longer a mere species to be ignored. Humanity was a force to be feared. The human delegation was given quarters in a section of the station that had clearly been designed for less important guests. The rooms were small, the furniture was uncomfortable, and the temperature was set several degrees too cold for human comfort. It was another attempt at intimidation, another reminder that humanity did not matter here. Daniel didn't care. He had more important things to think about. He sat in his small room with Laura, Kevin, and Captain Webb, reviewing their situation. Sophie had gone to rest, exhausted from the stress of translating under such intense pressure. The Dea crystal with the evidence from Kepler's Hope sat on the table between them, a small object that carried the weight of thousands of lives. "They're scared," Kevin said, breaking the silence. "Did you see their faces when you showed them the fleet buildup?" The Montari representative looked like someone had slapped her. "Scared doesn't mean cooperative," Lavra replied. "The Vectari have allies on that council. Species that benefit from their trade routes, their military protection. They won't want to see the Dominion weakened." Daniel nodded slowly. "What do we know about the other council members? Who might support us?" Lavra pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through intelligence files. The Montari Collective has always been neutral. They value logic and fairness above all else. If our evidence is solid, they might push for justice purely on principle. Representative Xyla seemed interested in what we had to say, Kevin offered. More than interested. She looked like she already knew something we didn't. "The Karathi are the Council's enforcers," Lavra continued. "They go wherever the power is. If we look strong, they'll respect us. If we look weak, they'll crush us without hesitation." "And the others?" Daniel asked. Laura shook her head. "Mixed bag. Some are ancient species that have been around so long, they've forgotten what it's like to fight for anything. Others are newer members who are still trying to find their place. Most of them will follow whatever the majority decides." Captain Webb spoke up. "Sir, I've been monitoring communications since we arrived. There's a lot of chatter happening between the delegations. The Vectari are trying to spin a story that we fabricated the evidence. They're calling us dangerous, unpredictable, a threat to galactic stability. Are they convincing anyone?" Daniel asked. "Hard to say. But I picked up something interesting. Webb pulled up a recording on his tablet. This is a transmission between the Montari delegation and someone on their homeworld. It was encrypted, but our systems managed to break it. He'd played the audio. The Montari language was full of clicks and whistles, but the translation software provided subtitles. The humans have evidence we suspected existed. The Victari have been conducting these raids for decades. Smaller species, younger colonies, species too weak to fight back. We chose to ignore it because it served our interests. But now there are witnesses. Now there is proof. The question is whether justice matters more than convenience. The recording ended. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So they knew. The Montari knew what the Victari were doing, and they looked the other way. It appears so, Kevin said grimly. The Victari have been testing younger species, seeing who they can push around without consequences. And the Council let it happen because it kept the peace. Until us, Lavra added. Until we decided to push back. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the families on Kepler's Hope, who had trusted their government to protect them. He thought about the children in that shelter who had died in darkness, afraid and alone. He thought about the promise he had made to himself when he read the first reports of the attack. Never again. We need to speak with Representative Xylith, Daniel said finally. If the Mantari are wavering, we might be able to bring them to our side. And if they support us, others will follow. Lavra frowned. That's a risk. If the Victari find out we're making side deals, they'll use it as evidence that we're scheming against the Council. They're already calling us schemers, Daniel replied. At least this way we'll actually be scheming for something worthwhile. He stood up and walked to the small window that looked out at the stars. The dying red sun cast everything in shades of crimson, like blood spreading through water. Set up a meeting, he said, quietly. Tell Xylith that I want to talk about the future of the galaxy and humanity's place in it. The meeting happened 6 hours later in a small observation lounge on the far side of the station. Representative Xylith arrived alone, her compound eyes reflecting the starlight. She was tall and thin, with limbs that bent in ways that human joints could not manage. When she spoke, her mandibles clicked softly between words. President Carter, she said. I was wondering when you would reach out. Daniel gestured to a seat, and they sat across from each other in the dim light. You already knew about the Victari attacks. You had intelligence that confirmed what I showed the Council. Xylith was silent for a moment. The Montari Collective values truth. We gather information. We analyze patterns. We draw conclusions. But we do not always act on those conclusions. Why not? Because action has consequences. Xylith's eyes shifted slightly. The Victari are powerful. They control trade routes that many species depend on. They have military forces that can crush smaller civilizations without effort. To challenge them is to risk everything. Daniel leaned forward. And so you let them murder innocent people. We made a calculation, Xylith replied without emotion. The suffering of a few versus the stability of many. It is the kind of calculation that powerful species make every day. It's the kind of calculation that makes you no better than the Victari. Xylith's mandibles clicked sharply. Perhaps. But it has kept the peace for 10,000 years. Daniel shook his head. That's not peace. That's fear dressed up as order. You've created a galaxy where the strong do whatever they want and the weak simply accept it. Where's the justice in that? Where's the honor? You speak of honor as if it matters, Xylith said. In the cold void of space, honor is a luxury. Survival is what matters. Then why are you here? Daniel asked. Why did you agree to meet with me? Xylith was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was softer, almost thoughtful. Because you are different. Your species is young, but you do not behave like a young species. When the Vectari attacked your colony, you did not beg for help. You did not run to the council asking for protection. You built warships. You prepared for war. You came here not as victims, but as equals. She leaned forward slightly. In 10,000 years, I have never seen a species rise as quickly as humanity. You terrify the council, President Carter, not because of your weapons, but because of what you represent. You represent change, and change is the one thing that ancient species fear most. Daniel held her gaze. Then help us. Help us show the council that change doesn't have to mean destruction. Help us create a galaxy where justice matters, where the weak are protected, where species like the Vectari can't murder innocent people without consequences. And what do you offer in return? Partnership, Daniel said. Real partnership. Humanity is going to keep growing, representative. We're going to keep expanding. Nothing the council does will stop that. The only question is whether we grow as friends or as enemies. Xylith considered this for a long time. The stars turned slowly outside the window. I will speak with my delegation, she said finally. I make no promises, but I will speak with them. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Daniel returned to his quarters as the station's artificial night began. Tomorrow, the council would reconvene. Tomorrow, humanity would learn its fate. But as he lay in his uncomfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, Daniel allowed himself a small feeling of hope. The galaxy was beginning to see humanity for what it truly was, and that was exactly what he wanted. The council chamber felt different when Daniel entered it for the second time. The same towering seats, the same ancient walls, the same dying star visible through the dome above. But the atmosphere had changed. The bored arrogance that had filled the room yesterday was gone. In its place was something sharper, something uncertain. The council members took their seats slowly, watching the human delegation with new eyes. Ambassador Drethkal was the last to arrive, and Daniel noticed that he walked more carefully than before. His smooth confidence had been replaced by a nervous energy that made his movements jerky and quick. The arbiter called the session to order with a wave of its ancient hand. This council has reviewed the evidence presented by the human delegation. We have examined the sensor logs, the weapon signatures, the flight path data. We have also received additional information from other sources that confirms many of the claims made by President Carter. Daniel felt Lara tense beside him. Additional information. That meant Xylith had done more than just speak with her delegation. It is the finding of this council, the arbiter continued, that ships belonging to the Vectari Dominion did attack the human colony of Kepler's Hope without provocation. The attack resulted in the deaths of approximately 39,000 human civilians. The chamber erupted into noise. Some council members shouted in anger. Others called for order. The Vectari delegation was on their feet, Drethkal's voice rising above the chaos. This is an outrage, he screamed. The council is being manipulated by these primitive creatures. The Vectari Dominion will not accept this verdict. The arbiter spoke the same word it had used yesterday, and silence fell immediately. Ambassador Drethkal, the arbiter said slowly, your protests have been noted. However, the evidence is clear. The Vectari Dominion is found responsible for an unprovoked attack on a member species of the galactic community. Member species. Daniel noted the phrase carefully. Humanity had never been called a member species before. Furthermore, the arbiter continued, this council has received testimony from the Montari collective regarding similar attacks conducted by the Vectari against other younger species over the past several centuries. These attacks were previously unreported or were dismissed as accidents. In light of the human evidence, they are now being reconsidered. Drethkal's face had gone gray beneath his scales. His eyes darted around the chamber, looking for all eyes, finding none. The Council will now hear from the human delegation regarding their demands for resolution. Daniel stepped forward. He had prepared for this moment for months. Every word had been chosen carefully. Honored members of the Council, he began, humanity does not seek vengeance. We seek justice, and we seek a future where no other species will suffer what we suffered at Kepler's Hope. He paused to let the words settle. We ask for three things. First, we demand that the military commanders who planned and executed the attack on Kepler's Hope be handed over to stand trial for their crimes. The individuals responsible must face consequences for their actions. Drethkal made a sound of protest, but a sharp look from the Arbiter silenced him. Second, we demand reparations for the families of the victims, financial support for those who lost loved ones, resources to help rebuild their lives. The amount should be determined by an independent council committee. Several council members nodded. These were reasonable demands, the kind that could be negotiated. Third, Daniel said, and his voice grew harder, we demand that humanity be granted a seat on this council. The chamber went completely silent. A seat on the council. It was something no species had achieved in over 1,000 years. The 12 seats had been fixed since ancient times, held by species that had proven themselves worthy through millennia of service and sacrifice. For a young species like humanity to demand a seat was unthinkable. This is absurd, one of the council members shouted. Humans have barely left their own solar system. They are children playing at being adults. Children who built a fleet capable of threatening the Vectari Dominion in 14 months. Representative Xylith replied calmly. Children who uncovered crimes that this council chose to ignore for centuries. Perhaps it is time for new perspectives. The argument exploded across the chamber. Species that had been silent now took sides. Some supported humanity, impressed by their strength and their courage. Others opposed them, afraid of what change might bring. Daniel watched it all unfold with a strange sense of calm. This was what he had wanted. This was what humanity needed. Not acceptance, but respect. Not tolerance, but recognition. The Arbiter called for order once again. The Council will vote on each demand separately. First, the matter of the military commanders responsible for the attack on Kepler's Hope. The vote was swift. 10 species voted in favor of handing over the commanders. Only the Vectari and one of their close allies voted against. The motion passes. The Vectari Dominion is ordered to surrender the individuals responsible within 30 standard days. Drethkal sat in his seat like a statue, his eyes fixed on nothing. Second, the matter of reparations for the victims. Again, the vote was overwhelming. Humanity would receive compensation for the loss of Kepler's Hope. It would not bring back the dead, but it would help those who remained. Third, the Arbiter said slowly, the matter of a council seat for humanity. This vote took longer. Council members whispered to each other, making calculations, weighing risks. Daniel watched their faces, trying to read their decisions. Finally, the Arbiter called for the vote. 6 in favor. 4 against. 2 abstentions. The motion passes, the Arbiter announced. Humanity is granted provisional membership on the Galactic Council, with full voting rights to be reviewed in 10 standard years. Daniel felt Laura's hand grip his arm. Behind him, Kevin Price let out a breath he'd been holding for far too long. Sophie Grant was crying quietly, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. They had done it. Against all odds, against the power of ancient species and the weight of millennia, humanity had won its place among the stars. The Vectari delegation stormed out of the chamber without another word. Drethkal did not look back. He knew that his career was over, and possibly his life as well. The Dominion did not tolerate failure. As the session ended, and the council members began to leave, Representative Xylith approached the human delegation. Her compound eyes studied Daniel with something that might have been respect. "You have changed things today, President Carter," she said. "The galaxy will not be the same. Is that a good thing?" Daniel asked. Xylith considered the question. "I believe so. We had grown stagnant, comfortable in our power, blind to our failures. You have reminded us what it means to fight for something, what it means to believe in justice, even when justice is inconvenient." She extended one of her long limbs in what Daniel recognized as a Montari gesture of friendship. "I look forward to working with your species, President Carter. I think you will make the council more interesting." Daniel took her limb and shook it carefully. "That's what we're hoping for." The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, just as the journey out had. But this time, the ship was filled with celebration instead of tension. The crew of the Liberty understood what had happened. Humanity had faced the most powerful beings in the galaxy and had not blinked. Daniel spent most of the trip in his quarters, writing reports and planning for the future. There was so much to do. Treaties to negotiate, alliances to build, a seat on the council to prepare for. The hard work was just beginning. On the final night before they reached Earth, Laura found him standing on the observation deck, watching the stars. "Hell of a month," she said. Joining him at the VIEWPOR2, Daniel nodded. "Hell of a month. Do you think we're ready for this? A seat on the council, a voice in galactic affairs? We're still so young compared to the others." Daniel thought about Kepler's hope. He thought about the families who had lost everything, about the children who had died in darkness. He thought about the promise he had made to himself, to them, to all of humanity. "We're ready," he said. "We have to be. Because if we're not, if we fail, then what happened at Kepler's hope will happen again. Not just to us, but to other species, other civilizations, other innocent people who don't have anyone to fight for them." He turned to look at Laura. "That's what this seat means. Not power, not prestige, responsibility. The responsibility to make sure that the strong can't prey on the weak without consequences. The responsibility to be the voice that no one else is willing to be." Laura smiled. "When did you become such an idealist?" "About 14 months ago," Daniel replied quietly. "When I saw the first images from Kepler's hope. The Liberty dropped out of warp speed as Earth appeared in the viewport. Blue and green and beautiful, hanging in the darkness like a jewel. Home. Daniel looked at it and felt something warm in his chest. Pride, hope, determination. The galaxy had thought humanity was weak. They had thought humans were primitives who could be ignored, bullied, destroyed without consequence. They had been wrong. Humanity had fought back. Humanity had stood up for itself. And now humanity had a seat at the table where the future of the galaxy was decided. It was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more enemies to face, more battles to fight. The Victari would not forget what had happened. Neath.